Our sense of taste is also considered a chemical sense, although there are other contributing factors like temperature, texture, and smell. So gustation involves taste buds. Taste buds are akin to the olfactory epithelium in your nasal cavity, in that there are cells that support the neurons, supporting cells. There are the neurons themselves, which are known as gustatory receptor cells, and then there's also basal cells located in a taste bud. These taste buds are microscopic structures. You cannot see them with the naked eye, but you can see the larger structures that contain taste buds. Those are called papillae, or a papilla. And looking on the surface of the tongue, we can notice quite often 4 different types of papillae. The large structures at the back of the tongue are known as valate papilla, and they contain taste buds. There are smaller papillae scattered throughout the tongue known as fungiform, and they're known as fungiform because they look kind of like a mushroom shape under the microscope. There are foliate papillae on the sides of the tongue, which are these folds, but they often go away as we age. These are usually only noticeable in children. And then there are filiform papillae, which actually do not contain taste buds, but instead contain tactile receptors for textures. So taste buds are going to contain the gustatory receptor cells that are stimulated by chemicals known as tastants. There are stem cells called basal cells, and then there are also supporting cells in a taste bud. We already know the 3 cranial nerves that transmit our sense of taste. They include the facial nerve, cranial nerve 7, glossopharyngeal, cranial nerve 9, and the vagus nerve, cranial nerve 10. Each of these 3 nerves cover different parts of the tongue and the epiglottis and throat. When these are stimulated by different chemicals, they transmit using action potentials through the thalamus and then eventually to the gustatory cortex of the cerebral cortex. There is hypothalamus and limbic system involvement in your sense of taste. If you think of the hypothalamus helps maintain a lot of your homeostatic conditions, one of those being nutrition. So it promotes you to eat food. So you have to notify the hypothalamus when food is being eaten. There's also emotional impact when we eat our food. Many foods give us an emotional effect. Taste is often considered much more complex than smell. If you think about the number of nerves, if you think about the fact that it's not just a chemical sense, it's also temperature, pain, textures that contribute, as well as smell. In fact, 80% of your sense of taste comes from smell. Next, we're going to look at the 5 primary tastes. They include sweet, which comes from monosaccharides or sugars, sour, which is an acidic stimulus, salty, which are a number of different ions, obviously sodium chloride being the most abundant salt, bitter tastes, which come from many different chemicals. An example are the alkaloids. And then finally, there is a flavor enhancement that comes from an amino acid known as glutamate. We often call this a savory flavor or a flavor enhancement. It specifically was named umami. Umami is a Chinese word for savory. You may have heard of MSG. MSG stands for monosodium glutamate. Once this savory flavor was identified, companies developed synthetic glutamate, MSG, and added it to food as a flavor enhancement. Other contributions to taste include temperature. Different foods taste better or worse at different temperatures. Mechanoreceptors, so that's texture, contributes to your sense of taste. And then pain. There's a number of things that'll stimulate pain receptors. One example of a chemical that stimulates pain receptors is capsaicin. Capsaicin is the chemical found in hot peppers that give foods that spicy taste. So these are all different contributing chemicals and others to your overall sense of taste. What's interesting is sweet and salty receptors tend to be concentrated at the anterior portions of your tongue. Sour receptors tend to be concentrated along the sides of your tongue, and bitter receptors are way in the back. The belief is that we had to find sweet and salty foods as a source of energy and electrolytes. So we often would have to, and we're talking years ago, before there were Publix and restaurants, we'd have to taste things in our environment to find carbohydrates, which are sweet, and electrolytes, which are salty. Bitter receptors are concentrated in the back of the tongue in order to prevent bitter things from being swallowed. The reason is many poisons in our environment are bitter. Looking at the neural pathway, we see the 3 cranial nerves transmitting from different portions. The facial nerve from the anterior 2/3, glossopharyngeal from the posterior 1/3, and then the vagus nerve innervates the epiglottis and areas in your throat. All 3 of these nerves enter at the medulla oblongata, go up to the thalamus, and then are relayed over to the proper area, being the primary gustatory area of the cerebral cortex. And that is where you perceive your taste. Next video, or set of videos, is going to cover vision.